Good. Good. Zoom, can we hear? Okay, good. Good morning. We begin by thanking our sponsors, the Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Mar Cheshvan, Yankee and Lisa Statman, and Yitzi and Rebecca Statman, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Menucha Shendel, Yehudis Bas David Yosef, as well as Shmuel and Robin Karabkin, in commemoration of the 25th yahrzeit of Robin's mother, Melanie Solomon, Alea Shalom, Pesa Miriam Bas Chaim. The Neshama should have an Aliyah, and family should have an Achama. We thank Jeff and Debbie Schwartz for sponsoring the Week of Learning in commemoration of the 5th yahrzeit of Debbie's mother, Shulamit Bas Shmuel. The Neshama should have an Aliyah, and the family should have an Achama. Today's daf is Nedarim daf Tes Zayin. We're going to be picking up with the Mishnah on the beginning of daf Tes Vav Amud Beis. Mishnah writes as follows: Shavua. So the first thing we have to notice is that we are beginning the Mishnah with the lashon of Shavua. This is Maseches Nedarim, but there are a lot of comparisons and contrasts between Nedarim and Shavuos, and this Mishnah is dealing with a Shavua. So a person takes a Shavua. She'eni Yasha. So you see clearly, Shavua is when he talks about himself. A Neder is where he talks about the item. Here he says about himself, Shavua she'eni Yasha. A person makes a Shavua that he's not going to sleep. She'eni Medaber, that I will not speak. She'eni Mahalech, that I will not go. Aser. Indeed, that Shavua does take effect, and therefore he's not allowed to sleep, he's not allowed to speak, and he's not allowed to go wherever he said he wasn't going to go. Even though these are a davar she'ein bo mamish, it's not a tangible item, but he was speaking about himself. He was forbidding himself from engaging in any of these activities, and therefore the Shavua works. Now the Mishnah continues. If a person expresses the words, Karban lo ochalach, or ha karban sha'ochalach, or lo karban lo ochalach mutter. A little bit confusing language this person is using. And exactly what he meant to say is a little bit unclear, and it's part of what happens, part of why this doesn't work. It's also not clear if the Mishnah is switching back now to Nedarim, where a person is saying karban lo ochalach. Now he's speaking about the item. The simple understanding is that we're continuing to speak about a Shavua, and the person expresses the Shavua with the language of karban lo ochalach. In other words, it will be like a karban, and therefore I will not eat it. Or ha karban, this is like a karban sha'ochalach, that which I will eat. In other words, that which I will eat, I am making it as a karban for myself. It's a little bit of a convoluted way of speaking, and that is part of the reason why it's not going to work. And karban lo ochalach, low carbon, it's not a carbon, what lo ochalach, what I will not eat, which implies that what I will eat is not a carbon either, or is a carbon. Again, it's backwards. It's very confusing. Now, if you look through the Ran explains this. It goes through all the cases, and the basic idea is, as we spoke at earlier, if a person takes a shvua b'chayi carbon, on the life of a carbon, it doesn't work. A person wants to take a shvua, the name of Hashem, or with the name of Hashem in the Sefer Torah, that's a valid shvua. A person takes a shvua on the life of a carbon, it doesn't have any effect. And that's why it doesn't work. If you look at the Ran, it's pretty extensive about it. At the end, with regard to the last term, it's on the next page in Tezayin Amud Aleph. There's like a period in the Ran. He says, La carbon lo ochalach. Just notice it says La carbon lo ochalach. In our Mishnah it says Lo carbon lo ochalach. Nami shari tekivan de lamed psucha. Since the lamed has a patach underneath, so it's La carbon ka'amar lo carbon mashma. It means low carbon. Again, in our Mishnah it actually says low carbon. And then it says, V'lekkel lememar demichlal lav mashma hamasha yochel yehi carbon. That will imply that what I will eat will be a carbon. Tamas nisni kra meir kim nala, rameir halastin chalavat hashmehain. Rabbi Meir does not hold to the concept of Mechal Lavat Shmehain that you can imply the yes from the no, and therefore it's not going to work. Okay, the Gemara continues. Mani Masnisin. Who is the Tana of this Mishnah? The Gemara says Rabbi Meir he must be Rabbi Meir. Di Rabbi Yehuda lo shani le karban lo shani le ha karban. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we mentioned this earlier in the previous Mishnah, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the point is it has to say ke karban. You have to have a chaf there. So it doesn't make a difference if it says ha karban or karban, it makes no difference. So it must be that it's going to be Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, ema seifa, let's learn the seifa. La karban lo ochalach. The person says la karban lo ochalach, which is the expression we just discussed, it's mutter. The Mishnah says clearly it's mutter. The problem is, Batanan, we learned in the Mishnah, la karban lo ochalach, Rabbi Meir oser. So Meir says it is a valid expression of a shavua. So how could our Mishnah say it's mutter if Rabbi Meir says it's aser? Seems to be a pretty big stira. V'amar Abba, the reason why it's going to be aser is because nase ka'omar la karban yehei. We say it's as if this person says la karban yehei. This should be like a karban, and then it's going to be like a neder. Lefikach lo ochalach. Therefore, I am forbidding myself from eating it, which is the expression of a shvua. In other words, that's why Meir says it's going to work, is because we have to play with his words a little bit. When he says la karban lo ochalach, what he means to say is this should be like a karban, and therefore, what I'm saying is I'm not going to eat it, and that's why it's asros. Now, our Mishnah is a problem because our Mishnah says that it's mutter. Where it says lo kasha had amar la karban, had amar lo karban. So there is a difference between a la karban and the full expression of low karban. It's not a karban, which is our Mishnah, which means still low havi karban. In other words, the bottom line is our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and the fact that our Mishnah says it's mutter, and in the other place we kind of fix his sentence to mean it should be like a karban, and therefore I won't eat it. The fact that our Mishnah doesn't do that is because our Mishnah actually has the word low karban, so it's very hard to say when a person says low karban that it's not a karban, that what he meant to say was it is a karban. So therefore in our Mishnah it's not a karban, and therefore it's not a valid expression of a shvua or neder, and therefore it's going to be mutter. Now, we're going to see very soon that even at times when a person says something which seems to be very clear, that based on the context, it could be that he means the opposite, and that's the idea of sarcasm. And we're going to see very soon that it's not always so clear that if a person is very clear, he articulates something really very clearly, that that's what he means, and really everything depends on the context. So even though our Mishnah says low karban, we're going to see in about a minute that that's not always going to be the case. Shvua, the next Mishnah. Shvua lo ochalach. That's one example. Again, clearly, the Mishnah says shvua. So we're talking about a shvua. Shvua is when a person forbids himself, an isser gavra. He's talking about himself, not the item. Shvua lo ochalach. Shvua, again, the context from the Mishnah seems to mean that I will not eat it. Ha shvua sh'ochalach. This is a shvua, that which I will eat. Again, another expression of that which I will eat is included in the shvua, which let's just assume at this point means he's saying he won't eat it. Or lo shvua lo ochalach. There's no shvua on what I won't eat. All those cases, it's aser. It's aser, in other words, lo shvua, there's no shvua on what I won't eat, which means what I will eat, there is a shvua. Now, so that's how the Gemara works it out. Now, it's just important to point out, the first thing that anybody would ask is if this Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Meir, which we just established about a minute ago. And remember, our Gemara sticks Gemara between all these little snippets of the Mishnah, but it's one long Mishnah. This is one long Mishnah. Now, the assumption is that if we establish the first 3 lines of the Mishnah to be Rabbi Meir, the rest of the Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Meir. Now, over the last few days, we already were pretty clear that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that we don't say Mechlal Lav Ata Shemeyahin. Rabbi Meir expects you to be very clear what you mean and what you don't mean. So if you say no, you mean no, and we're not going to imply the yes from the no. Now, clearly we just did that, because we said, lo shvua, lo ochalach. There's no shvua on what I won't eat. So there's a double negative here. There's no shvua on what I won't eat, but there is a shvua on what I will eat. And the Mishnah says it's a valid neder. So how does this work? So you have to look at the Ran over here to understand this. This is critical. On the Ran on the left side of the page, I would say about 2/3 of the way down, at the beginning of the line, it says shvuas lamed vav in parentheses. And now the Ran says, Rabbi Meir michlalav atashemei hein. All of this that we've been saying so clearly up until now, there are mayors of the opinion that we don't say michlalav atashemei hein. In other words, we'll never pull a yes out of a no. Hani mili, that's specifically talking about bimamona, when there's a relevance to a monetary matter. Inami be'isura de isbe mamona. When we're talking about a matter of isser, permissibility, or an area where it's going to be prohibited, in matter of isser, but it has to be some type of isser to isbe mamona that's relevant to money. Ava be'isura greda, when a person is talking about isser alone, in other words, specifically talking about isser, isle, he does hold of mechalav atashemei hein. He explains, v'nedarim isura de isbe mamona ninhu. Nedarim is always going to be an isser that's relevant to monetary matters. Why mishum delo mishkachas pahu below chefza ha'einan chalan al davar shein bo mamish. In neder, as we said a number of times up until now, a neder always is talking about the item that is in discussion. Will I eat this loaf of bread? I shouldn't say that. Is this loaf of bread permissible? Or is this slice of meat permissible? Is this glass of wine? Is this water? Are my eyes going to be permissible to close and go to sleep? It's always relevant on an item. So even though it's a matter of isser, because nedarim fall into the category of an isser, nevertheless, it's always relevant to something that has some type of monetary value or some type of tangible effect. Shavuos einon ela isura greda. It's simply an isser. When a person takes a shvuah, he is imposing upon himself an isser. It's not a davar sheish bo mamish. It's not tangible. It's all isser. Shehuchal begufo v'kiven de isura greda ninu. Since it is only an isser, afilu Rabbi Meir moda darmina bu mechalav atashemei hein. Rabbi Meir is going to agree that we say mechalav atashemei hein. Now this is such a critical ran. It should even be part of the Gemara, because we've been so clear up until now. Every time we use this concept of michlalav atashemei hein, that can't be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir doesn't buy into this logic that michlalav, that when you say no, I could extrapolate from what you said no about to understand what you mean to say yes about. Now that's not a logic that Rabbi Meir uses. The Ran just told us, by the way, that's not 100% true. It's 100% true in Maseches Nedarim, because Nedarim is a matter of isser. It's a matter of a prohibition, but it's always going to be relevant to something which has tangible monetary value. A loaf of bread, or a slice of meat, or something else which is tangible and can have some type of monetary effect. However, when it comes to a shavua, the whole shavua is not tangible. Shavua is isser. I am imposing upon myself an isser. And Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that we do say mechalav atashemei hein. From the no, I can extrapolate the yes. Rabbi Meir does buy into that concept when we're talking about something which is only relevant to isser, and therefore when the Mishnah is talking about shavuos, which is only isser, Rabbi Meir is perfectly fine with the concept of mechalav atashemei hein. Now, interestingly, the Ran says it clearly like that, but if you look in the Rush, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you look at the Rush says something similar, but he says, he doesn't say because shvua is isser, it says shvua is chamira. A shvua is more strict, it's much more stringent. He doesn't say this because of isser, he says it's because it's more strict. So all the Rishonim have to step in here to somehow understand how all of a sudden Rabbi Meir is buying it mechalav atashemei hein. That from the no you could extrapolate the yes, but the Gemara doesn't explain it. So the Ran gives his explanation, and the Rosh just says because a shvua is more chamor, it's more stringent. The Gemara says as follows: Mechlal, this Mishnah seems to imply dehash shavua she'ochalach. And when a person says, and that's how we translate it in the Mishnah, the second line in the Mishnah is hashavua she'ochalach. In other words, which means this is a shvua, that which I will eat, which means that I won't eat. And the Gemara says, Mechlal seems to imply the hashvua she'ochalach, when a person expresses the words, here is a shvua about which I will eat, which the lo achilna mashma. The person seems to be saying, I won't eat. The problem is, v'raminu, this is a stira, shvuos, if you go to the first parak of Masechah Shvuos, it says, shvuos shtayin shehein arba. There's two expressions, but they can manifest themselves in four cases, which is, sha'ochel v'shalo ochel, I will eat or I won't eat, sha'achalti v'shalo achalti, that I ate or I didn't eat. In other words, I will, I won't, I did, I didn't. Those are the four types of shvuos. Either future, I will, I won't, or past tense, I did, I didn't. That's how a person can take a shvuah. So now, midika amar she'ochel, you have to add in a word. The Bach adds in a word. So the Gemara is missing a word over here. Midika amar she'ochel v'shelo ochel, that I will eat, or that I won't eat. She'achalti v'shelo achalti, that I ate or I didn't eat. Mechlal de she'ochel l'cha da'achilna mashma. She'ochel means that I will eat. Remember, now we're in the world of Shavuos, where a person is talking about himself, not about an item. So now the word she'ochel literally translates as I will eat. The problem is, in our Mishnah, she'ochel seems to mean that I won't eat. So now how do we make Maseches Nedarim's language and Maseches Shavuos' language be consistent with each other? Our Mishnah seems to imply that when a person says, HaShavua she'ochel, it means he's taking a shvuah that he won't eat. The problem is the language of Maseches Shavuos seems to imply that when a person says she'ochel, it means that they will eat. Amar Aryeh says she'ochel shtei lishonos mashma. It means both, and context is everything. This is such an important line from Aryeh. The context is everything. You can't live your life with little sound bites. You have to understand the whole context of what happened over here. And he explains. I'll give you an example. Someone was being pressured to eat. Person is not eating, and someone is trying to convince him. The language that's used here by Rashi, by the Mefarish, is maftsirimbo. They're pressuring him. They're pressuring a person to eat. And the person responds, he says, okay, fine. Achilna. Fine, I'll eat. You know what? The person expresses, not only will I eat, but I promise you, I'll take a shvuah that I'm going to eat. In such a case, the context of that conversation is the person's being pressured to eat, and he responds and says, okay, fine, I will eat. In such a case, yes, she'ochel means I will eat. Shvuah, you see the shvuah she'ochel, then it means he will eat. In other words, if his previous two statements, the two phrases that he verbalized before were that I will eat, and then he follows up with a shvuah that says, yes, I will eat. So okay, the context of it there means that he will eat. Aval amar lo achilna, v'su amar shvuah she'ochel, lo achilna ka'amar. Again, you're inviting someone to your house for lunch, and he says, I'm not coming. I'm sorry, I don't want to come for lunch. You say, come to us for lunch. We're going to have a great time. It's going to be awesome. The food will be great. He says, I'm sorry, I can't get out today for lunch. I'm very busy. And you're back and forth. You're pressuring him. And finally, the guy says, you know what? All right, I'll be there. Sure, all right, I'll be there. Sarcastically, everything about what he's saying is sarcastic. And you know what? Not only will I be there, I'll take a shvuah that I'll be there. Come on. You know what the guy's talking about at that point. That's what Aryeh says. I'm not coming to eat. So then the whole thing is lo achilna kamar. He's being sarcastic when he says that he's making the taking the neder. So again, this is an example of where the person expressed the opposite of what he's doing, but you can't just pull out one tiny little line over here. This is the concept of in psychology of the meta-communication. That when a person says something, you can't just highlight the words that they said. If the person says, oh, dinner was delicious, and they take their whole plate and chuck it straight in the garbage, you understand the person meant the food was inedible, even though the words that came out of their mouth was the food is delicious. So you have to really take into context everything that's going on. That's why Aryeh says, don't get so nervous from the fact that in our Mishnah, she'ochel meant I won't eat. In Maseches Shavuos, it means I will eat. The word she'ochel, depending on the context, could either mean I will or I won't. Rashi disagrees, and he says, she'ochel de shavua she'i ochel ka'amar. When a person says she'ochel, what he was trying to say was she'i ochel. He was trying to verbalize that he won't eat. But again, he swallowed it all together, and it sounded like she'ochel. So the Gemara says, okay, and came pshita. So if a person said, I'm not eating, so what's wrong with that neder? What's my lemembra? What's the news in this line that a person takes a shvur that he won't eat, that he can't eat? Our Mishnah needs to be telling me something new. We don't need a Mishnah to tell you that if a person takes a shvur that he's not going to eat lunch, that the shvur works. Gemara says, Mao de tema mekim lishnehi de'itkal le kamash malan. In other words, you might think that perhaps the guy slipped up. The guy slipped up when you said she'i ochel. He meant to say she'ochel, but he stuttered a little bit, and he said she'i ochel instead of saying she'ochel. Kamash malan, that we're not going to fix up his language. Now, on the way in this morning, Michael asked me, why can't you just say what you mean and mean what you say? So it happens to be the Rosh over here asks a similar question. He's like, why don't you just ask the guy what he meant? What are we getting like Yored L'sof Daito Shel Adam? A person took a shvua, and you know what? Maybe he was stuttering. The guy said she'i ochel, that I won't eat. You know what? Maybe he was stuttering. He meant to say she'ochel. Just go to the guy and say, what do you mean, sir? You told that you took a shvua that you're not going to eat. Okay, that's what you said. You took a shvua she'i ochel. Yeah, we're done with the daf for the day. Just ask the guy, what do you mean, for heaven's sake? All right, so he says, the problem is, one second. Kivin shahot dahotzi b'svasav she'i ochel lo mamnina lev ma'dik amar basar hachi. So says the Rosh, which is on the bottom of the page, that once a person expresses something, so then he expressed it. We can't use the dvarim shebalev over here. He said something. He's an innocent Jew. He comes to the Rav and he says, Rabbi, I'll do whatever you tell me. This is what I said. And what did I mean? I don't know. But this is what I said. What's the halacha? Okay? Just tell me what the halacha is. And that's really, essentially, he's even saying, I don't even know. I'm not sure. I took a shvua. Maybe I meant this, maybe I meant that. But what I said is she'i ochel. So says Rav Ashi, you might think that you could kind of fix up his language because it's just a strange thing to say. Kamash Malan, no, we don't get involved, we take the language as it says. So now the Gemara says, Abaya lot amar tam Rav Ashi. Abaya does not agree with Rav Ashi. In other words, he does say the context is very important over here. Why the lo katani she'i ochel? Slight problem. Rav Ashi didn't say she'i ochel. So in other words, it would be very nice if it said she'i ochel, but that's just not what it says. So Abaye says, I'd rather add context to this instead of changing the words of the Mishnah. And Rav Ashi nadi min tam do Abaya. Rav Ashi moved away from the tam of Abaya, which this has to be. You have to just notice how the Gemara contrasts the way that it discusses why Abaya doesn't agree with Rav Ashi and the way that Rav Ashi doesn't agree with Abaya. When it comes to Abaya, it's Abaya lo omar tam Rav Ashi. He doesn't say the same reason as Rav Ashi. When it says Rav Ashi was nadi min tam do Abaya. Now nadi min tam. So if you look at the Mefarish, the Rashi on the side, it says nodad v'sor. He turned away from it. So Abaya clearly just ignored Rav Ashi's reasoning. Why? It's not what it says in the Mishnah. We can't add any words into the Mishnah. But when it came to Rav Ashi, he kind of turned away from it. It seems like he's not really disagreeing with Abaya. He holds like Abaya in halacha that context matters. He just didn't want to explain our Mishnah that way. Why not? Kasavar shelo ochel nami mashma shtei lashonos. He says everything could really mean two lashonos, and shelo ochel could also mean two things. Why? Because hayu mesarvim bo lechel. They were pressuring somebody to eat. V'amar lo achilna, lo achilna. And then he adds on, V'amar nami shavua. Bein she'ochel, bein shelo ochel, hadena chil lamashma. Again, someone goes over to another person and says, it's very important to eat lunch today. And he says, I'm just very busy right now. He says, you got to eat lunch. You know what your day's going to be able to at lunch. And he says to him, I'm not going to eat. Lo achelna. In other words, he's saying to him, of course I'm going to eat. I'm not eating now, or I won't eat this, or I won't eat at your house. but he is essentially sarcastically just responding, do you think I'm not going to eat? So now lo achilna could also mean both ways. And then if he takes the shvua afterwards and says, shvua nami, v'amar nami shvua bein shloach bein shlo achal, hadein achila mashma, the amar, and therefore v'ikul truth nami lishna de shvua, lishna shvua shlo achal, shvua de lo achilna ka'amar, elatana paska she'ochel de achilna mashma, v'shlo achal lo achilna mashma. Therefore Rav Ashi says, anything can really be switched around once you start adding context to it. And even saying I won't eat can mean sarcastic that I will eat, and I will eat means sarcastic that I won't eat. Ultimately, the bottom line is the context could always change the definition of what you're saying. And therefore, says Rav Ashi, I'd rather just focus on what it says in the Mishnah, and even though, parenthetically, doesn't say she'i ochel, but if we add in that yud over there, that was what was intended to say, and the Mishnah is just going to be clear. The she'ochel means I will eat, the lo achel means I won't eat, and again, if the context changes the meaning, says Rav Ashi that I'll buy into it, but ultimately that's not the pshat of the Mishnah. Now, if you turn the page to the Ran, because the problem is that the Ran extends over all the way to the other side of the page, so the Ran on this Gemara goes all the way halfway down Daf Tezayin and Beis. Just important, it's a Nedarim is a little bit more difficult to read, but again, the Ran, while he writes a lot, he does add in a lot of halacha l'maisa, so it's important just to get to see that. Leaning halacha, it's about 3/4 of the way down in the skinny lines. Leaning halacha, kvar kasafti beperak shvuas shtayim, Basra, and the second shvuas shtayim, because there's two of them in Masechah Shvuas. Shaharambam zal pasa ka Abaya. The Rambam paskins like Abaya. Ukisugi tahasa. V'herachti sham b'tayme shel davar b'siyata d'shmaya. Aval haramban zal pasa karav ashi de la'olam she'ochel de'achil namashma. V'shelo ochel shlo ochel mashma. So it's machlokas rishonim. According to the Rambam, whenever someone says something, we kind of put the neder, or should say we put the shvu on hold. We analyze the whole situation. We take all the context into account. And then we say, you know what? She'ochel in your case meant I won't eat, or she'ochel in your case meant I will eat. According to the Ramban, according to the Ramban, that's not how it works. She'ochel, whatever you express from your mouth. You said you'll eat, the shvua is that you'll eat. You said you won't eat, the shvua is that you won't eat. So that's how the Rishonim deal with that. How do we paskin? Probably like the Rambam. I have to check the Shulchan Aruch, but probably like the Rambam. But please don't come ask me this question. Okay. Now, I mentioned before that all these Mishnayos are really connected. Now, the next Mishnah continues, Zeh chomer b'shvuos mi b'nedarim. This is what is more strict about a shvua than a nedarim. V'chomer b'nedarim mi b'shvuos. And this is what is more strict about a neder than a shvua. And interestingly, it's clearly going back on what we said before. Because the Mishnah doesn't go ahead and say things, it just moves on with ketzad. How does this work? In other words, there's something more chomer about a neder than a shvua. Something more chomer about a shvua than a neder. What's that talking about? It's talking about the fact that it could be chal, it could take effect on something which is a davar she'ein bo mamish. Now, and he goes on to explain, ketzad, amar konim, or on the dvar mitzvah. The Mishnah explains, ketzad, how does this work? Amar konim sukkah sha'ani osa. Person takes a shvua, a neder, on a sukkah that he will make, which is interesting. You have to, again, just notice this. He doesn't say sukkah sha'ani yoshev, a sukkah that I'm going to sit in, sukkah sha'ani osa, which means he's talking about the building, making the sukkah. The language seems to imply that he's talking about the mitzvah of building a sukkah, which is a fascinating discussion, because who said there's a mitzvah to build a sukkah? There's a mitzvah to sit in a sukkah. Who said there's a mitzvah to actually build a sukkah? So, again, this is an interesting sugya, it's an interesting topic, but clearly, at the end of Hilchas Yom Kippur, it says that after Yom Kippur, person should immediately start building the sukkah. Why? Because mitzvah baliyotcha tach mitzena, person should go from mitzvah to mitzvah. So, again, it seems like that's a hechsher mitzvah. Like, in order to be able to fulfill your mitzvah on sukkahs, you're going to have to build it. But it doesn't seem like it's a mitzvah in and of its own right. But again, we do see that there's an expression that the building of the sukkah is a mitzvah. There's also a Rashi elsewhere which seems to imply the building of sukkah is a mitzvah. There's definitely some element of a mitzvah. I just would point out, I think that sukkah shani osa over here, he means to say doing the mitzvah. I don't think he's talking about actually building the sukkah. The Mishnah over here, even though the language says sukkah shani osa, he's taking a neder from the sukkah that I'm going to make, that I won't sit in it. Again, why don't the Mishnah just tell us what it meant? This must be one of those cases where context matters, right? Sukkah shani osa, he means he's not going to sit in the sukkah. Lulav shani notel, he takes a neder that he won't shake a lulav. Tefillin shani meniach. Nedarim aser. By Nedarim, indeed, the neder works and it becomes aser for him to sit in the sukkah. It becomes aser for him to shake his lulav. It becomes aser for him to wear his tefillin. B'shvuos mutter, by shvuos it's mutter. Why? Because she'ein nishpoyin lav or al mitzvah. A person cannot take a shvuot or be over a mitzvah. So again, this is a clear difference between a neder and a shvuah. A shvuah is, I am imposing an isur upon myself. Now, I'm not allowed to impose isurim on myself if Hashem already told me that I should do that. We can't disagree on these things. Hashem already worked out this agreement with Klal Yisrael. We're mushbach Yomi from our Sinai that we will keep the Torah. So I can't just take a shvuah that I won't. But a neder, I can forbid myself from this specific or this particular item. Turning the page, Daf Tezayin Beis, the Gemara says, Chomer, you're telling me it's more strict, mechlal than neder. It sounds like it is a neder. V'ha mutter katani. The problem is that it says it's mutter. What does this mean? When you talk about something being more strict, again, because we have to really understand, the Mishnayos are connected. So when it says zeh chomer, when it came to sleeping, a person takes a neder that he won't sleep. What do we say? It doesn't work. You can't take a neder on sleep. So that's the chumrah of a shvuah of a neder. That a shvuah is more chumrah than a neder. You can take a shvuah that you won't sleep. You can't take a neder that you won't sleep. The problem is, that's not a matter of chumrah or not chumrah. It doesn't work at all. Chumrah sounds like there's a chumrah over here. It works, but it's not as chumrah. If it's not relevant, it's not a chumrah. So the Gemara says, chumrah mechlal de nederhu. V'mutter katani. The previous Mishnah said if a person takes a neder, that he won't sleep, it's mutter. The Gemara says, aseidach idach bava katani. There were a lot of small snippets of Mishnah that we mentioned, and we're referring to the other part of the Mishnah, which is Shavua she'eni yashin she'eni medaber she'eni mahalech aser zecham b'shuas Nedarim. And if you'll remember on the previous daf, we learned that there's a concept called bayachel midrabanan. So even though there's no bal yachel on that, but there is a concept of dvarim hamutarim va'acherim nagu behen iser. This is what we learned yesterday. Even though it's technically mutter, but others already were noeg iser, so there's a din of bayachel midrabanan. So yes, there is the language of chumrah is relevant. It does apply. Why? Because there is a din midrabanan on that neder. All right, the Gemara continues. Chomer ben nedarim b'shvuos. A neder is more chomer than a shvuah. Ketzad went on to explain that a neder can take effect on a mitzvah, but a shvuah cannot. Rav Kahana Masni Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav. Rav Kahana learned the following statement in the name of Rav Gidel Amar Rav, and Rav Tavyumi Masni Amar Rav Gidel Amar Shmuel. They had a different yichus for this line. Minayin she'ein nishpayin lav al mitzvah. So where do I know that a person cannot take a shvuah to be over on a mitzvah? Tamalomar lo yachel divaro. A person cannot be mechel. A person can't. What's the word for mechel? He can't diminish or he can't ultimately. What's a good word for yachel? To make it cheap. To desecrate it. Person can't desecrate his own words. In other words, divaro lo yachel. In other words, when a person says something, then he can't be mechel, he can't cheapen that and ultimately just be over on what he says. Divaro lo yechel v'mechahu l'cheftzei shemayim. If he said something which is in contrast to cheftzei shemayim, to mitzvos, then indeed he can trying to find the right word for this. He can diminish or make cheap his own words. So Maishna is probably make his words profane. In other words, when a person says something, you have to be careful. Your words are important. If a person goes ahead and uses certain language, you have to uphold it. But if your language is language which goes in contrast with the Torah, then indeed, yes, you can be mechalel your words. So ma'ishna neder d'chsiv. Again, so fine. Now we understand why a shvuah can't work against the mitzvah. So ma'ishna neder d'chsiv ish ki yidar neder l'Hashem lo yachel devaro. Person will take an neder to Hashem lo yachel devaro. His words he can't be mechalel. But shvuah nami haksiv oh he shava shvuah l'Hashem lo yachel devaro. We have the same language when it comes to a shvuah. So why is it when it comes to a shavua, a person's shavua does not take effect when he takes a shavua against the mitzvah by a neder? It does work. Amar Rabbi, Hada Amar Hanoas Sukkah Alai. So it depends what he says. When a person says Hanoas Sukkah Alai, that works. Hada Amar Shvuah Lo Ehena Min Sukkah. In such a case, it doesn't work. So Amar Rava, Chimitzvahs. We brought this up yesterday. Can you use the concept of hana when it comes to a mitzvah? A mitzvah, you do it because Hashem said to do it. That's why we do a mitzvah, not because it brings us enjoyment, because it brings us benefit. Of course, as Aaron said yesterday, there's a lot of enjoyment which comes along as a fringe benefit of doing mitzvahs, that it's very enjoyable. But it's not given to us for hana. So how could you use a neder that I'm not going to be neder from the sukkah? The function of a sukkah is not hana. The function of a sukkah is to sit, b'tzila demnusa. Ela Amarava, Hada Amar Yeshivas Sukkah Alai. The sitting of the sukkah should be forbidden on me. Hada Amar Shvuah Shlo Eshe B'Sukkah. A person takes a shvuah that he won't sit in the sukkah. A person cannot take a shvuah that he won't sit in the sukkah. V'she'ein ishbain lavar l'mitzvahs mihacha nafka. Is it true that the source that a person cannot take a shvuah to be over on a mitzvah that is learned from that pasuk? The problem is mihasam nafka. We have another place where we learned it from Tanya, where we learned in the Rabbi. Yachal nishbal levatas mitzvah v'lo bita yechayev. You would think that if a person took a shavua, he took an oath to be mevatel a mitzvah, not to do a mitzvah, v'lo bitel, and indeed he did fulfill the mitzvah, yachal yechayev, he'd have to bring a carbon. Tamalomer lahara ulahetiv. The pasuk says in it, O nefesh kisi shava levatis v'sayim lahara lahetiv, for good, for bad, or for good. So I would say, Ma hatava rishos af hara rishos, just like hatava, the good side of it, the positive side of it is rishos. The hara side, the negative side of it is also rishos. Yatsa nishpa levatos mitzvahs lobitos she'en rishos biyadi. He doesn't have permission to determine whether he's going to do mitzvahs or not. So we have clear another source that a person does not have the right to take a shvuah to ultimately not do a mitzvah. So the Gemara says we have to have two sources. Why? Chad kol miftray mi carbon. You have to have one pasuk to patrim, to exempt him from bringing a carbon. Sorry, chad kol miftray mi carbon shvuah. One of them comes to say that if a person takes a shvuah not to fulfill a mitzvah, there's no need to bring a carbon. V'chad miftray min lav de shvuah. The other one is to patrim, to exempt him from the lav, the whole avera altogether. So that's why we have to have two psukim. Now, interestingly, just have a couple more minutes on the concept of sukkah. And the idea of sukkah and mitzvos and shvuos and the benefit that comes along with it. Yesterday I mentioned, when I was talking about sleep, an interesting shaila with sukkah. So there's another interesting shaila which is not necessarily relevant to our, specifically to our daf, but talking about a person forbidding others or forbidding themselves from using a sukkah. There was an interesting shaila that was asked in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, as well as here, a kosher restaurant generally will have a sukkah because they want to get business over Chol HaMoed. Now, in Israel, not all restaurants are owned by Shomer Torah mitzvahs, and not everyone who goes into a restaurant who's Jewish will eat in the sukkah. Many people in many areas are happy to go into a restaurant and just not eat their food in the sukkah. Rahman al-Islam. Now, there's a guy who in a area of Eretz Yisrael had a restaurant where there are other competing restaurants next door. Now, this guy was an observant Jew. He put up a sukkah outside his restaurant for his customers to be able to benefit from the sukkah. Now, what happened was all the other restaurants had no sukkah. They didn't want to take on the expense of building a sukkah. And all the customers would go to whichever restaurant they want, and they say, hey, look, there's a sukkah right here. And the guy who owns, so aside from the fact that there could be issues with the hechsher, but let's just ignore the hechsher. That's just getting the technical issues in the way. But people were going to restaurant A and using the sukkah of restaurant B. So now, does the person who owns the sukkah from restaurant B have the right to tell the people, hey, listen, you can't eat in my sukkah. Go eat it on the street. That's a Shiloh was asked to a Rav. His own customers want to sit in the sukkah. They have to wait in line to get a table because guys from down the block are using his sukkah. So again, it would seem in a regular Chosh Mishpat area, this is my sukkah. This is my sukkah. You have no right to come in my own private property. But it happens to be this is a very serious Shiloh because the mitzvah of Arvos is such that and I think this is something which is overlooked. We always look at Arvos on the positive side of it, which is that I could be motzi you with Kiddush. Why does everyone have to have a whole glass of wine? I could do a mitzvah of making Kiddush during the day. Everyone else is yotze with my mitzvah. Why does that work? The reason it works is because I'm connected to you. And if you have not yet fulfilled your mitzvah, there's something missing in me. The Sharat Tzion in Siman Taf Reish Nun Hey, I believe. Taf Reish Nun Hey uses a language when it talks about lulav. Shaharei im chasar lo, harehu kachasar li. If one person is not able to fulfill their mitzvah, or doesn't fulfill the mitzvah, even if they are able to, there's something missing in my kiyum of my mitzvah of sukkah. So my mitzvah of sukkah requires that I look out for other people's kiyum of a mitzvah of sukkah. So it's an interesting language of the Mishnah Berurah. He uses it in a few places, but it changes the whole perspective on Arvos. Arvos is the reason why I can make Kiddush for you is because as long as you didn't make Kiddush today, there's something missing in my Kiddush. So I have a connection to your Kiddush so I could do it for you. So in terms of Psak Halacha, there's a Choshe Mishpat area over here. It's my sukkah. But there's also another chiyuv over here that I have to look out for people who are not eating in the sukkah. Person's eating a sandwich outside the sukkah, so therefore there is a level of chiyuv upon me to see that you eat in your sukkah. Now, what's going to be the halach in that case? It's an issue for a beis din exactly what should be done in that case, but it's not clear that he could forbid people that he has a right to forbid people from eating in the sukkah from a Yordei or a Chayim point of view. From a Chosh Mishpah perspective, perhaps. And it's related to our daf because, again, when it comes to a Shavua, sometimes a person can impose an Isra on themselves by astering themselves from the walls of the sukkah. But for a person to take a Shavua and say, you know what, I'm being misalik myself from this mitzvah. I'm removing myself from this mitzvah. I don't want to do it. I take a Shavua not to sit in the sukkah this year. I'm sorry, sir. It's possible that you don't want to benefit from that wood, but the mitzvah is already in agreement we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You can't just sever that mitzvah, so the shvuah doesn't even take effect. Why? Because I have pre-agreed agreements from beforehand. The same thing is true even with other people. There are chiyuvim that I have towards other people to see to it that they have an opportunity to sit in a sukkah. And even though from a Choshen Mishpah perspective, perhaps you want to rent my space, you have to pay for it, but to forbid people from eating the sukkah is not so simple. Have a wonderful day. Oh, it was a sukkah.